Welcome to another episode of Why This Beer. Join us as we explore the unique facets of our craft beer scene and the remarkable individuals who help shape these exceptional brews. I'm Aslan Graves of Main Street Brewing, and as always, I'm joined by Darren Binema of Neighborhood Brewing and Yellow Dog Vintage.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, and welcome. And today we are thrilled to introduce our guest, Ben Howe from Otherlands Beer. Our first time going cross borders.
Whoa, really? Oh, God.
Renowned for his
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great timing, by the way.
It's time to heal. It's time to heal.
Yeah.
There was no rule against political tirades, so that's, oh, God.
Yeah. Renowned for his anthropological approach to brewing, Ben has taken the craft beer world by storm with his exceptional creations. One standout is his Haladuda Special, a beer that pays homage to the often underrated style of lager, as well as the women and matriarchs in his family and that surround him. Haladuda celebrates the beauty of simplicity and balance, showcasing a blend of traditional brewing methods and innovative techniques that highlight the ingredients and natural flavors. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, you certainly make Haladuda sound interesting. I don't know.
That's the goal.
That's quite an introduction on it. That's
Yeah,
cool.
Well, try and wax poetic where we can.
Yeah, well, it's working.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your craft beer journey and like a little bit of intro about yourself for those who don't know?
Sure. My wife and I own Otherlands Beer in Bellingham, Washington, just over the border from you guys, or at least from you, Aslan. Yeah, we opened in 2020, kind of right into COVID. We were supposed to open in April, and unfortunately missed that by about a month. And so I ended up opening in June, and it's just been obviously like opening in that time, it's been a crazy wild ride since then. I personally started brewing, I was home brewing in college, but I started brewing professionally in 2007. I got a job when I was 22, right out of college, washing kegs, delivering kegs, filling kegs at Cambridge Brewing Company, and really quickly fell in love with it and realized this is what I wanted to do. Even though it did not pay very well, and I worked really hard, and I was really sore, and my back hurt. I was like, someone's paying me to do something I really love, and I think I'm decent at it, which I had spent a lot of time playing music, and realized that I was not decent at it, and no one was going to pay me to do it as much as I loved it. And so finding something that was like, oh, this is creative, and I can do this. It was it just kind of warped my world. And then I started homebrewing even more because I was at work and I had free ingredients. And that's where my first mentor, Will Myers, who's the brewmaster at Cambridge Brewing Company. That's where I met him, and he took me under his wing, and I just learned a tremendous amount from him. And I spent 4 years working with him. Also Megan Parisi, who she was a lead brewer. She's brewed all around now. She's the R&D brewer at Sam Adams, but she taught me how to clean a tank, how to run a transfer, how to do everything in the cellar, like how to do all the dirty things that you need to do, and how to do it all on a very compressed timeline. Oh, you're mashing in. Yeah. Okay, you're running a transfer while you're mashing in. Yeah. She kicked my ass. She's awesome. Yeah, it was a tremendous place to learn, and I met lots of great people, and eventually I ended up meeting my wife there. But I worked there for 4 years as a brewer. And then I was arrogant enough to go start my own little nano brewery back when nano breweries made sense, kind of, called Enlightenment Ales, focused on making beer to champagne and saisons. And I did that by myself for 2 years. And then I partnered with another brewery and did that for another 2 years. And then the building we were in got bought by a casino magnate. And suddenly an opportunity,
as they do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not the most loathsome one these days, but also among the loathsome ones. And so we basically found out we were getting kicked out of our building, and at the same time, like a new chapter kind of started. A friend of mine, Anders Kissmeyer, who's a brewer from Denmark, was like, "Hey, do you know anyone who wants to work in rural Denmark at this little tiny farmhouse brewery? They're looking for an American brewer." And so I threw my name in the ring and got that job and left Massachusetts, where I had lived 30 years of my life and never thought I was ever going to leave, and went to rural Denmark and lived in a village of 100 people and just had a tremendous mind-blowing experience, and got to travel around Europe and do some internships, and it very much changed my trajectory. And then I think the next really big milestone, I'm sorry if I'm just kind of going, but
No.
The next really big milestone was when I was in Denmark. I took a road trip, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, we took a road trip around Bavaria. We're going to end at Oktoberfest." And we were driving on some highway that cut through Franconia, kind of northern Bavaria, near Bamberg. And a friend of mine was like, "You have to stop in Franconia. Like, you're outside of Bamberg. Like, go to all these breweries." And he gave me a list of like 50 places. And I was like, "What? What's the number one? If I only have time for one?" He's like, "Go to this place called Mönchsambach. You just have to go there." And so I went there, and they were closed. And I was traveling with a friend of mine who had worked at Cambridge Brewing Company named Alden, and he spoke German because he was interning. He was woofing. He was doing like an internship in Germany and working on his German. Anyway, so he ended up talking with the owner who was there. They're like, "Oh, we're closed for 2 weeks. It's vacation, but like we're still working." "Oh, you're a brewer?" Like, "Yeah, well, I'll show you around." And we had been drinking Bavarian beer for a couple of days, which was just like, I couldn't believe how good it was. We had been to like Eyinger, we had been to Munich, like we had all these great beers. I had never had better lager. And then he just opened up a bottle of Mönchsambach, and that was the moment that changed my trajectory. Like, I had never had a beer like that. And it's like, what is this? What have we been drinking if this is what I'm drinking now? And, he sent us home with a couple of beers. We bought a case, and then we went to Bamberg and just had that. Oh, we had a list of my friend gave me the list of like 50 places, and he looked at it. He's like, no, don't go. Okay, that one's okay. And then he's just like, he wrote me a new list of like 5 places, and we went to it and had pretty much the same experience at every one of being like, what is this? Like, I've never had beer like this.
Yeah.
And it got me deeply fascinated with why the beer was so different, how lager beer could be so expressive. Because I love Saison, and I was really, really into Saison. I still love Saison. But I spent a lot of time with Enlightenment brewing Saison and seeking out Saison and farmhouse ales, and just like, because they're so expressive and they're so different and they're so kind of paint and color outside the lines. And so then, we had been in Bavaria drinking these like crisp, clean, beautiful lager beers.
Right.
But then in Franconia, it was like that, but lagers. It was like farmhouse ale. I had never had things that were so varying and complex and expressive and yeast forward. And like I said, it completely changed what I was interested in and what I wanted to know more about. And so then when I finished working in Denmark, I kind of pleaded and got an internship at Mönchsambach, and that further just warped what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. And then I went back to the U.S. and Caroline and I, who had stayed together while I was in Europe, actually going to Europe kind of made us a lot closer. We moved to Portland, Oregon, and I got a job working at Wayfinder with Kevin Davey, who has a very I learned a hell of a lot from Kevin. He's a very new German lager brewing approach, kind of the Chuckanut Will Kemper method. Doing somewhat warmer fermentation, rising for a D rest, passing D, crashing down, lagering at 0, and then filtering bright, and making beautiful, crisp, wonderful beers. And I don't think I had ever filtered before. It was just a really different approach to brewing lager beer than I had been exposed to, that I had done before, and that I had been exposed to when I was actually in Europe. And so I learned so much from Kevin. And in that time, like when I interviewed for the job, I told him, "Hey, my wife and I, Caroline and I, are working on opening a place," and we ended up selecting Bellingham. And so I think what we ended up making in terms of like our approach to making lager beers, and I think the beers that we're most interested and excited about, so much of it is kind of a hybrid of so much of what I learned at Mönchsambach, so much of what I learned from Stefan, the owner there, the brewmaster, and what I learned from Kevin, and obviously from other people along the way as well. But like we take a lot of inspiration from Mönchsambach and Franconia, and then a lot of skills and a lot of techniques that I learned from Kevin. And anyways, that's a lot of what we do. And with the Haladuda is a hybrid of many of those things too.
Yeah.
Nice.
Sorry, that was quite a ramble.
That's incredible. And so, no,
it's good. It's a really fascinating trajectory. Not everyone has that kind of like, and then I went to Denmark, right? Story. Yeah. So that's really interesting and cool.
Andreas Krenmer, that's the he published that historical Austrian ales book as well, right? I was just trying to put a context to the name there. Yeah.
So no, sorry.
Kind of always been fascinated in the anther.
Oh, sorry. That's Andreas. I'm Anders Kissmeyer is my friend. He had a.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry. Different Anders.
yeah. Similar but close.
Anders worked at
Either way
at Carlsberg for a long time, and then he had he opened a brewery in Denmark, and actually Sean Hill from Hill Farmstead came and worked for him many years before, and I think that was his. I don't want to speak for him. I think that was how he came to Europe and had his mind blown there. So
yeah, but yeah, it seems like anthropologically, almost in a sense, like it's always been like about like figuring out what the beer is at that time in that place and how to add your own twist to it or your own. Yeah, that's really cool.
There's something when I mean going to a different place and just seeing like a different way of thinking about beer, a different way, like the philosophy. It's not just like all the details are different. We're still making beer, but like the details are different. But then just like the way people think about how they make beer that was what really blew my mind. Like it's a totally different just philosophy to its creation and its relationship between the maker and getting out of your bubble is good. That's what I took from it.
Yeah, and like there's so many other things, like how the beer is like served, how the beer is like, you know, presented, and like how people are ordering beers. It's so different in different beer cultures too, right? Whereas, I mean, you go to like a Bavarian beer hall, you're gonna get served a beer differently than you get served a beer at Earl's and Kamloops here. Like it's gonna be a different presentation. So like, yeah, definitely traveling kind of shows you how other people, you know, treat it. And not to say that it's always better somewhere else or always worse somewhere else. Just finding that, just more travel kind of exposes you to that.
Have you guys had an experience similar? Have you had an experience of just like kind of reevaluating what you think about beer, of like seeing a different way of doing it, or having a beer that just like changed your trajectory?
Well, I think like we were talking about the Czech trade mission here just before we got on, and I always think about just the fact that so much of the beer there has just tons of diacetyl, and like to the point where I would find as a North American like pretty not good, and it's just like when you come with that approach of like, oh, this is not good beer, you're coming with your own kind of perspective. But like being there in the Czech Republic kind of just showed me that it actually just like is not a focus for them. Generally speaking, like for some then that don't enjoy it, they will really like focus on not having it. But I'd say for the majority, it is not like a focus for them. There's so much other flavor that they're more focused on than that. So that was like, oh, this is interesting. Like we're like, so like, I mean, at our brewery, we're like very much, we don't want to have diacetyl at all. But that's a personal, you just say like, okay, that's a personal preference. That's not actually like, there's no hard and fast rules about brewing. And it depends on where you are and what people like.
Well, when you spend all day like hunting it and making sure it's not in your beer, you can get really hung up on it when you find it in other people's beer, which is problematic.
True.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. You go and have like a Piers beer somewhere, and it's the first thing you're looking for. Yeah. When coming to the West Coast, did you feel you had to adapt any recipes? I mean, I guess you're kind of making the switch from like on the East Coast, you're doing mostly saison and beer to champagne. So coming over here, did you feel you had to adapt anything in order to like make the beer you wanted using the ingredients you had?
You know,
was it kind of like a terroir approach?
It's funny. It's an interesting question. I was thinking about that earlier today because I don't think I've made any changes based on, oh, I'm in a different environment now. I have to the tastes are different here. People want something different. I think generally the philosophy that Carolina and I have taken towards Otherlands is we're going to do something different. People don't know they want it, but we're going to show them that they want it. Like, you haven't had this yet. Like, we'll hold your hand and be like, oh, no. You want 4.5% Helles that is no frills and flavor. Like, this is what you want. Like, that's kind of been our general thesis, is do something different that we really believe in and show people why it's great, and that'll work. And so we haven't really felt the need to change or modify what we're doing to kind of suit the local taste. But it has been really fascinating. So when I had Enlightenment Ales, I have all my old brew logs and everything. And so when we were getting ready to open, I kind of thought we were going to be doing like 50% lager, 50% saison and IPA and pale ale. And now it's like 4-to-1 3-1 or 4-1 lager to IPA and saison. We always have saison because I love saison and we're never going to not have it. But when we were getting ready to open, I was like, I got to brew 2 saisons. And I looked at like some old recipes, beers I used to make a ton of, and I was like, who wrote these recipes? Like, these hopping rates are insane. And then I was like, okay, scale them back.
Right.
And then I was like, not fur enough. And like, scale them back even more. And then like, even the other day, I was looking at a beer that I hadn't brewed in a year, and I was like, God, these hopping rates are insane. Like, I guess what I mean is like my tastes and what I think is sensible and my approach and the things that I've learned, I think over many years have changed. And that has changed my approach as I'm now like reinterpreting the recipes, because I have a better idea what I want to make. And I have like a better idea in my head of like what it should taste like. And I look at like what I used to think I should do to make it taste like that. And I'm like, oh my God. So I don't know. I don't think we've changed to suit local tastes. As our tastes and our sensibilities have changed, we've definitely changed. I don't think that answers the question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, that makes sense.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, I think that one, like Bellingham is a pretty good, strong beer scene. So I guess just making sure that the the beers of high quality is like the biggest thing for you as well. I think it's a pretty, like, there's a ton of breweries in a pretty small town.
It's nuts. Yeah.
There,
but great.
Yeah. And
yeah.
How was it specifically, like, going to Bellingham, being like, we're gonna have a lager focused brewery in a place that is so well known for lager, like between Chuckanut and Kolshin have had a pretty strong hold, like internationally for lager.
It's odd. Like, when we first were looking at Bellingham, or not when we first looked at it, we ruled it out because we're like, there's too many breweries, not enough people, too many. It's like, it doesn't make sense. And we ended up like revisiting it with our business plan like a year later. What really attracted us to Bellingham is Carolina had gone to school here. She lived here for several years during school, and then she was in the Peace Corps, and then she came back after the Peace Corps. She just loves Bellingham. And when I first ever came to the West Coast to visit, she's like, we have to go visit Bellingham. And she just showed me around. It's like, this is one of my favorite places. So it has like a really important spot in her heart. And so when we were coming up to like visit a friend of hers, and we went to Structures Brewing. I tell the story all the time to the point that I think it really annoys James, the owner of Structures. And I had met him at Wayfinder, and we popped in. We're like, hey, we're going to be coming up to Structures, and we told him about our plan. We're like, hey, like we're trying to open this place. It's going to be like a little vegetarian brew pub. It's going to be pretty small, and we're going to be making like a lot of rustic lager and some saison and IPA. And he kind of was like, yeah, you could do that here. I was like, yeah, but there's so many breweries. It's like, well, if you make excellent beer, if you do a good job, and you do something that everyone else isn't doing, like if you add another little piece to the tapestry here, that's what Bellingham wants.
Yeah.
Like, Bellingham is known as a beer town. It's got great street cred as a beer town. People go to Bellingham to have beer. Do something different and like add on and make it bigger. Totally, you'll fit in. And that's kind of the basket they put our eggs in. I think in terms of like, okay, yeah, it's very intimidating being in the same town as Chuckanut. But one of the things that I love so much about being in a town, a place like Chuckanut and Kolshin, and now Brian, who worked at Chuckanut many years ago, and then was at Freem, and now is back. He's one of the owners of Structures now. I adore his lager beers. They are so different than mine. They are the opposite end of the spectrum. He uses very different ingredients. He uses different techniques. He filters his beer. They are delicate and precise, and I love drinking them. And they're nothing like mine, and that is really cool. Like, well, for many reasons. One, because I get to drink something that's really different. That is also like astoundingly high quality, but it does a good job, I think, of kind of dispelling this notion that I think a lot of people have in their heads, who are into beer and maybe haven't gotten into lagers as much. Oh, okay, a lager's a lager. Okay, oh, it's lightly flavored. No, like, try our Helles, try Brian's Helles. Like, they are so different. And we have this event that we do now in town called Night of the Helles, where we get like 3 or 4 breweries from town, and a couple from Oregon who have really great Helles, and we serve them all together at Kolshin. And it's such a fun event, and now a lot of people go to it. And you can taste all these different beers that are all really pale, malt forward, round lager, and they're so different. And yet, in terms of the flavor profile, like of all beer, they're still in this narrow window. But being able to have them side by side, it's so interesting, and I love it. So I don't know if that answers the question.
That's incredible.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it was intimidating, but it's great. So
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, like, I guess if you have, it's like there's a captive audience already. So like it's obviously worked for, for Chuck and for Kulshin, for these people. So you have like a really informed demographic. So it gives it an opportunity that you're not having to do nearly as much like consumer
That's
education.
a really good point. We've joked about if we opened in a kind of like a suburb of where Carolina grew up outside of Everett, if we had opened our place, first of all, I think people would have pelted our business with stones for being vegetarian. But like, it would have been very different. Like, I don't think we could have gotten away making a whole bunch of little 5% lagers.
Yeah. With that statement of like having a vegetarian food menu, I think one of the most incredible things and refreshing things, like me and my partner are vegetarian, when we came to your place, it was not like fluffy or like a big part of your persona. It was like, I think we read all the way through the menu and we're like, oh, wait a second, we can eat all of these things. It wasn't it wasn't like oh, at the top, like this is cruelty free, like, this. It's like, oh, this just happens to be.
Well, it's funny because that is very by design, but it wasn't our idea. There's a bar in Portland, formerly called Conquistador. I don't know how they got away with that name for very long. But it's now called Low Tide Bar, and it is one of our favorite places. We used to go there all the time. They've got great nachos. They have wonderful cocktails, and we would go there for like 2 years. When we got our loan, like when our loan was approved, we went there and celebrated, like just getting astoundingly drunk. Like, we was so excited. We loved that place. I think it was even after that. Maybe it was Valentine's Day. Anyways, we went in there and we were like going to actually get more than nachos. And we started reading through the menu and we were like, oh, we can get that, we can get that, we can get that. Like, did the whole thing. And it dawned on us after 2 years of going there that the place is vegetarian. It doesn't say it anywhere. And then we like scoured the menu. Like, where do they acknowledge it? Nothing. And that became kind of a cornerstone of what we wanted to do. Like, if you tell people this is how it is, well, they get an idea right in their head. And like, it's not our goal to preach and tell people what to do. But I think if you can like demonstrate, hey, again, like, I don't want to tell everyone the whole world should be a vegetarian, but like, it's easy to eat vegetarian sometimes. Like, look at all this food. Like, you didn't know it was vegetarian. Yeah. So I just kind of like making it easy for people to realize that you can get really good food that's filling and it's appetizing and it isn't boring. And anyways, so that's the idea. Like, don't shove it down people's throats. Let them find out.
Yeah.
Nice.
Same with Rust bloggers.
Well, we do a little bit more shoving.
There you go.
Let's talk a bit about the beer we're drinking, Haladuda. I'm not sure if
I haven't cracked mine open either.
But I'll crack it open here.
Oh, there we go.
I love that it's in a bottle.
It's in a bottle.
How smug? I want to ask, how smug do you feel right now that your beer's in bottles?
No.
Because if it were me, I'd be pretty smug.
You'd think so. However, so when I was going to set a stopwatch and wait how long until I got into this. Well, okay. So my general smugness about like I'm a bottle supremacist. Yes, that smugness stands, and it has nothing to do with the current political climate. The current madness that my country is undergoing right now, of which we will speak more of later, has actually affected us in a way that I didn't expect, because all of our bottles come from Canada. In order to get this bottle, the Vichy bottle, it comes from United Bottles, who I've been working with for years, who's awesome in Quebec. And when the first threat of tariffs came, I was like, well, it's too late. We're going to run out of bottles. We're totally screwed. And then it didn't materialize. So then I like put together an order, and I found someone else to like go in on a bottle order with me, because the shipping costs a lot. It's like, okay, we got it all set, and it kind of like crawled along, and it got all set, and we said, like, well, it's supposed to cross the border on Monday, and the tariffs come in on Tuesday. What happens if it's late? And they said, we'll cover it. And then the shipping got delayed, and it didn't cross. And to their credit, the company was like, yeah, we'll cover it. And I just feel awful about it, honestly. Like it's crazy. It's not their fault. It's not your fault. It's my country's fault. But it's yeah, I love bottles. but my point is, glass is not going to save us. Like aluminum's not going to save us. Glass is not going to save us. It's
no.
Anyways, all right, we can talk about something other than packages.
So, I think first time I heard about this beer was VinePair did an article in 2022 about most underrated beers in the States. Yeah. And it was Phil Pescic from Burt Gilman in Seattle that was talking about specifically Haladuda. And I was like, man, I need to go try this beer. And you were there at the time when, because it's been an anniversary tradition for me and my partner to go to Bellingham. It's just far enough away, but feels a little different. And I'm like, we got to go to Otherlands. I tried Haladuda. The beer's incredible. I think that was right around the first time that we were going through some big issues with sauce as a shortage. I was like, whoa, Lubelski's. I think I just switched to Lubelski independently of knowing your beer, and was kind of like, am I doing the right thing? Am I crazy? And then I had your beer, and I was like, oh, good. Okay, this is validation.
It's a great hop.
Yeah.
And then I remember you, Ben, being like, well, don't tell too many people because then I'm gonna be able to get Lubelski.
Yeah, let's put it on the internet. Like let's.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
What made you choose it, and like why a Polish Pilsner after talking so much about Franconia? I'm sure. I mean, you have other Franconian.
Okay, so
beers, but
the long and short of it is all right. So first off, my wife Carolina is originally from Poland. She moved to the United States with her family in 1989. Essentially as refugees. I mean, as with the end of the Cold War and things getting pretty crazy, they came to the United States. They settled in the Seattle area, and they speak Polish. She speaks. Her grandmother lives with them. They all speak Polish. Her grandmother only speaks Polish, Babcia, from where the name comes from, Haladuda, which is her maiden name. And so it's a really big Polishness, and Polish culture is a really big part of Carolina's life. When I was living in Boston, a good friend of mine, Chris Luring at Notch Brewing, who is of Polish descent, he had a beer called Lubelski, which he described as a Polish lager. And I remember having it, I think right after I came back from Europe, and just being like, this is so good. Like, what's this all about? And he's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. You know, I use these hops. And I was like, well, what makes it a Polish lager? He's like, it's just a Czech Pils, but I use a bunch of Lubelski. Like, I was like, oh, okay. He's like, well, like, have you had Polish beer? They kind of are that way. And I was like, all right. Well, actually, I've only had like really old Polish beer. Carolina took me to some Polish restaurants in Boston, and I remember like having like really old Żywiec or something, and being like, okay, I can imagine this was once a good beer, but it's not now.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know, but I knew good Czech Pils from living in Europe, and I knew Chris's beer and Lubelski, and I loved that beer. So I kind of had that in my head that was something fun to do, and like we had this idea of like, wouldn't it be fun to like make a beer to honor Babcia, and her maiden name being Haladuda, mine being Howe. We're like, oh, that's really fun, and like it's just such a fun word to say, Haladuda. And so we just thought it'd be like fun. We like, kind of filed it away in the back, like, yeah, someday we'll do a beer to pay tribute to Babcia, and like let her know that like, yeah, A, we love her, and B, like, you know, this is a language that we can use for expressing that love. Like, we made this thing for you. And so then I worked at Wayfinder, as we talked about, and the beer that I fell absolutely most head over heels in love with there was just called Czech Pils when I worked there. And the approach to making the beer was a single decoction with like a big decoction, and really, really heavy hopping with a lot of Czech Zats at first wort and 90 minutes, and then like a little bit at 10 minutes. It was such a different approach than anything I'd ever taken hopping wise. And I was like, Kevin, are you sure this is how you make it? Like, I'm looking at the recipe, like, yeah. I was like, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
And he said, it doesn't.
Yeah.
From like the way that we learn as brewers, like, oh, the longer you boil something, the more you drive off aroma, the more bitter. It's like it's so against the dogma that we learn as brewers. But his take was like, well, I don't know if it'll work for Amarillo. I don't know if it'll work for Citra, but some of these old noble varieties people have been using for hundreds of years, like boiling them for a long time seems to get a really different effect. And I adore that beer. And so the beer that kind of became Haladuda, which is actually the first Pilsner we brewed at Otherlands, we didn't open with it, but it was the second lager we brewed, was basically that kind of idea. It was like, okay, like let's make pretty much like an 11-degree Czech Pils. It's like 10.75 OG. And then we'll load it up with a lot of Zatz and a lot of Lubelski, because I know I love the Zatz. And Lubelski's new to me. Let's try it. Let's go a 50-50 split. We'll take a similar mash approach profile, and see, kind of roll the dice and see what happens. And I love the way those two hops played together. And so then we kind of tweaked a lot of different things, batch after batch, like dialing in the malt a little bit, dialing in the mash program, dialing in exactly what we're doing with the hops and playing with the water. But it hasn't changed that much. And that was kind of the idea behind it. And then, like, once we decided we wanted to brew it, we're like, now we can actually make this thing for Babcia, Carolina's grandmother, and like show her, hey, like this is for you. Like, I don't think it's too crazy to say that in a lot of cultures, including a lot of Western cultures, older women don't get a lot of respect. And being able to make something that's like, hey, matriarch, like, here, this thing is for you. Like, here's a name that has kind of disappeared because you got married and you got a different name. Like, here, let's honor this family and let's honor where you came from. Like, here's this thing for you. And it's been really great. So,
and also, like the artwork,
Carolina did that.
Incredible.
Yeah. Very nice.
Inspired artwork. And I was gonna say, I was reading that your wife Carolina did that as well. So it's like,
well, I'll show you. I was having a coffee.
It's a family special.
It's based on very traditional kind of Polish folk art. And so here are different renditions of chickens. But she did where you cut out tiny pieces of paper of different colors and kind of layer them on top of each other, and that was the idea. So,
with kind of leads into like one of the other questions I had for you. Like with Haladuda, and then you also have Damen Pils. You make a focus on beer kind of being a diverse beverage for all. And like my partner's Dutch. She immediately, when we were in Otherlands last and saw Damen Pils, she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna have that." Me being like English as a first language, and as a result, only language, I was like, "Oh, cool, yeah, sounds great." And then she like explained that that's like,
sounds great. Do it, honey.
Like woman Pilsner.
But like origin of Herren Pils. So I guess is that German for like gentleman, and Damen is like
ladies,
like a fair lady or whatever.
It's funny because we've had the only people who have.
How has that been received?
I think it's over the head of 99% of people, and it certainly would have been over like my head. I had Herren Pils a bunch of times when I lived in Europe, until like one day I was like, "What does that mean?" And they were like, "Oh, it means like gentleman's pills." And I was like, "Huh, all right." Like, and that kind of planted the seed, like, well, let's do something about this. We've only had a couple people.
Yeah, it's man.
It's only been we're fortunate to have lots of people from many different backgrounds who come to our place, and we've had plenty of people who speak German or can read German who have been like, "Why is it called women's beer? Why is it called ladies' beer?" And then we kind of explain the background, and they're like, "Oh, that's great." And I've had I can count on one hand the number of people who are like, I'm not getting a ladies' beer." they understood it. They're like, Damen Pils, I'm not ordering that. And I was like, whoa, it's pretty insecure. I don't know. But, to the bigger question though, like what else we really wanted to do with Otherlands. Backing up just for even another moment, when we originally were planning the place, like we had some other different working names, we had some different ideas of the place, and like it felt for a while like kind of a continuation of what Enlightenment was, my first little funny brewery. But Caroline and I really quickly realized working together and coming up with a business plan and deciding what it would be, that it wouldn't be that. Like some of the same beers have, as we talked about earlier on, like have kind of carried on and evolved from their earlier incarnations, but it's very much a fusion between what I'm really passionate about doing and what I want to make, and what she's really passionate about doing and wants to make. And so the place, like the way that it looks, the way that it feels, what it is it's not it's very Carolina focused in terms of like just the aesthetic of the place and how it feels. And one of the things that we knew kind of early on in Carolina has definitely like made a big point of pushing is to make sure that all kinds of people feel comfortable in the space, especially women feeling comfortable in the space. And I'm not in any way trying to slight other breweries in the US, but there's often places that you go that like they're very male dominated and they have just an atmosphere that's, and this has nothing to do with gender either, that like feels very industrial or very like it's a warehouse and it's got and plenty of women who love beer go there too. But like Carolina was like, I want this place to feel really cozy.
Yeah.
I want people to feel like they can, like it's warm inside. You can take off your coat and you know, we got flowers on the table and it feels like a really beautiful place that you want to hang out in. And so that was a really big part of that. And so one of the things that like we notice about the people who come to our place that we really love is that, yeah, there's lots of men who come to our place. There's lots of women who come to our place, but we get these like groups of kind of older women in their 50s who like come in or parts of book clubs or like come in for lunch all together. And I don't remember seeing a ton of that at other breweries that I've worked at in the States. And I really, really like that. And I don't think it's because we named a beer Haladuda, because we named a beer Damen Pills. I don't think like a signal about something has done it. But like Carolina has worked really hard to make sure that the space feels like all kinds of people can be there. And having little tiny tributes in our beer, I think, is a nice cherry on top. But Carolina's doing the work for it. So.
Yeah. It really feels like going into your space that it is a community space and like it is for everybody. Like, you know, there's children, there's an older demographic. It's not just, you know, hipsters with beards like
youths.
myself.
What is I'm curious, what has your experience been, not to get too technical, but with switching to Lubelski and using that? Are you still using it or?
Yeah, we contract. It's been a 1-to-1 replacement with Sots. For us, it was recommended to me as a suggestion from Charles Farham, and in that time, because I think alphas on Sots were like sub 2 that year,
right?
And they were like, the majority of our European customers have switched to Lubelski, and as long as it's not like a large focal point in your beer, it's been indistinguishable. At this point now, neither of our core lagers are nearly as like hop forward as and like traditionally European. Like both of ours are kind of more in the lines of American lager. But we've done a few beers that showcase Lubelski, and I'm like, oh, it's great. It's like a bit more like almost more lemongrass, lemon balm kind of character, a little bit lighter on the like peppery notes. And yeah,
it's great.
Is this the main beer?
Pretty much, we get it almost exclusively for this. We used it a little bit in the saison here and there. We did a really fun beer with a friend of ours. There's a brewery in Portland called Threshold. And Jarek and Sarah. Jarek is originally from Poland, and they make a Polish Pils that's like 5.5%, something like that. And so, and I don't think they use 100% Lubelski. I could be wrong. Anyways, a really tasty beer. And so we brewed a beer together this summer, really showcasing it, make it like a 10-degree Polish Pils, triple decocted, just one malt, one hop, and just all Lubelski. And it was fascinating to just get like, because we make a 10-degree Czech Pils that's all Zats. And so like having those two against each other, like being able to like see, what are the details between these different hops was really, really interesting.
It's funny because you end up in these things that you and almost inherit out of tradition, whether it's like a yeast that you use or, mash profile or whatever. And then it's like really hard to deviate in a way that you're like, well, we can only change one thing at a time, or like, it's like you can't be too aggressive and make a beer.
It is nice to get thrown out of your comfort zone, like, and to do something like really different.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it not only like do you learn new things, but it makes you look back on what you've done and realize exactly what you just said, that like you've been doing X because you inherited it. Like, this is the way that I learned this thing from my mentor or an old boss that worked really well, but like, why do I keep doing it? Because that's the way you do it. And I never questioned it, or I never, like, I was thinking the other day, like our Hellas, which I'm occasionally happy with, and I realized like we use a ton of Hersbrucker and Perla. I was like, and I was trying to find Hersbrucker because I had to brew a batch, and no one else in town had any. And almost everyone I asked, they were like, "Why are you even using Hersbrucker?" And I didn't have an answer other than like, I like it. And then I was like, what do I like about it? And I was like, well, Kevin used it in the Hellas that we used to make at Wayfinder. And I was like, and I like the way it tastes. I don't want to change that variable. And so it made me think like, maybe, I don't know, maybe I should try using Tet or something. Like, but I like it. Like, I'm not going to, if it broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
Sometimes you gotta like activate that toddler brain and just be like, but why?
It's a good way to put it. Yeah.
For this Haladuda, are you doing a decoction on it? Is that why it's so? You talked about doing one, or the Czech AF one was, but like this is 4.4%, but it's very full body.
That's So
how you're achieving.
I think that's one of the biggest ideas that Kevin really helped me to understand about decoction. So like when I was in Europe and at Münzenbach, like everyone did decoction. Everyone around the Bamberg area and Franconia, it seems like they're doing decoction, and their answer was like, "Why do you do decoction?" Oh, well, like that's how you make the best beer. Like, it wasn't let me show you the mechanisms that we're thinking about. It's like, that's how you do it, right? And my understanding, brewing decocted beers at home as a home brewer, and also like having other decocted beers, people talked about flavor. Oh, you got to unleash the melanoidins. Oh, there's a flavor profile that you get. And like, yeah, that's true. Yeah, there is a flavor profile. But the biggest thing that Kevin really turned me on to is mouthfeel and body. He's like, you're taking a bunch of grain, you're boiling it, you're getting this, you're extracting polyphenol, you're getting this big thing. You can make beers that are smaller not feel small. And that, I'm not trying to, maybe I'm putting words in Kevin's mouth. Maybe that's more how I would phrase it. But like, because we didn't decoct most beers at Wayfinder, we decocted some beers. But the CZA, it used to be called Czech Pils. Now it's called CZAF. That was, it just had such a big presence. And that really got me interested in the idea of it. So anyways, with this beer, we do a very strange decoction. Again, one that Kevin really turned me on to. So all the rest of our beers, if we do decoction, we either do a mash-off decoction. So, okay, we've gone through protein rest, we've gone through beta rest, we've gone through alpha rest, and now we'll send what we don't want to decoct to our lauter tun, we'll decoct what we do want to decoct, and then we'll blend it in the lauter. Okay, that's how we do our Helles. That's how we do some of our German pills. Or we'll do a more complex decoction. We'll be like, okay, like we'll mash in at a low temp, and then we'll pull a portion, we'll boil it, and we'll reintroduce it. Now we're at protein rest. So we'll pull some more, we'll boil it, and now we're at beta. We'll pull some more, boil it, now we're at alpha. Like, we'll do like a very intensive decoction program. The way that the Haladuda is made, which I have not messed with or changed, is basically the approach that we used to do at Wayfinder, which is, okay, mash in at protein rest because we need it, and then bring the whole mash up to beta, which is like, I think we used to, this I mash the beta at 65C. So yeah, 64, 65. We're like, okay, as soon as you hit it, send 1/3 away. We send 1/3 to our lauter tun, and then we immediately raise 2/3 up to alpha. And the idea behind that is I like my beer dry. Like almost all of our beers are fairly dry, but balancing all of that hop flavor and all of that bitterness, you need a little more oomph. You need something to balance it against. And so like Haladuda is like a 10.75 beer. It finishes 2.5 to 2.7. And like my German pills finishes like 2 or below. And so like it needs more. And like it's a little beer, right? It's like 10.75. And so in order to get that residual, I wouldn't even call it sweetness, but residual like oomph for that bitterness to rest against, we kind of got to trick it. And so that mash profile to me works really well. So a third of it hits beta and then is sent away and continues to just like live in exile at beta. 2/3 of it hits beta and then immediately is brought up, and you're like, now you're at alpha. You only had a brief glimpse of beta. That's it. And now, okay, and then we iodine test it after half an hour. Okay, you're done.
Yeah.
Boil it all. And so now you boil the 2/3. So you're basically, it's almost like you're getting 2 decoctions in one, because you're taking what would be like 2 1/3 pulls of decoction and you're boiling all of that. And then you blend it, and then you get in at one of those temperatures that you're in like the mid 80s, which is a temperature that like all of our home brewing books said like this is suicide. Yeah. Turns out it's not true.
No, danger.
So that's kind of the approach. It's kind of it's almost like a cheat decoction. We're doing like one big one.
John Palmer.
Limitless respect for John Palmer, but it's okay.
Yeah.
The temperature's okay. So
yeah, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. Also, thank you so much for talking in centigrade.
Yeah, that's good.
God.
The amount of times that I have a podcast going and I'm like literally like have like my phone next to me and I'm like, okay, like what's that in Celsius?
It took me a month in Denmark to realize how, like, obviously I knew how stupid certain things Americans do are, but it took me a month to be like, why do brewers do this? In the U.S., like engineers in the U.S. don't do it. Scientists in the U.S. don't do it. Like, why do brewers do it? Like, this is insane. Like, we should be doing everything in metric. And then when I came back, I was like, I can be a smug elitist as a brewer and be like, I brewed in Europe because I think in metric. So it's great.
Exactly.
Actually, decoction. I wanted to ask. So, are you doing direct fire?
It's direct fire.
Is it steam?
Oh no, direct fire. This is another place that I need to give credit to Chris Loring at Notch. In that, so what I realized, like a lot of Otherlands is very DIY. Like we built a lot of the place ourselves, but like a lot of things were like we specifically know what we want. We're not getting. If we can make it work, we're not going to get used equipment. We need a decoction system. Like we want horizontal lagering tanks. We want a system that can do decoction. But it was like, we don't have room in the small area for a steam room, and we don't have the money for all the steam generator and all the piping, and like it's just so much. And I like so many of the breweries that I saw in the Czech Republic and in Germany, surprisingly, were direct fire. And so then I started looking around for people who could build me a direct fire decoction system, or rather, who make direct fire decoction systems. And I had people literally laugh. They were like, there's no such thing. Like, what are you talking about? It's going to scorch. And I was like, I don't know. Like, pretty sure there's a continent where that's pretty, common. And so I relayed this story to Chris, and he was like, oh, you should talk to Specific Mechanical in Victoria. Like, I know that they make a direct fire decoction system. And so I was over in Europe and I saw them at the Brau Beviala trade show, and I relayed that story to them, and they're like, oh yeah, totally. And we have 10 customers that you can talk to who can tell you, you can call them and be like, hey, is your mash scorching or not? And so, like we realized like they could do it. They had the experience to do it. And I've worked on fancier systems. I've worked on obviously systems have a lot more bells and whistles. I've worked on worse systems. This is the best system I've ever worked on. It is exactly what I want. The direct fire aspect of it, it takes a little longer to move between steps. And basically when you churn off the heat, it takes a little bit longer to heat it. And that's part of that is having to churn our burner down just for the size of our flue and exhaust gas run and everything. Like there are consequences to like, we have to, if you're trying to like hit 65, you turn it on at 63.5 or you turn it off. And then you know that there's a ton of heat saved in the jacket, in the firebox, that's going to continue for the next 2 minutes as your mash is still spinning to heat it up. So, but I figured that out in the first like month or so. And now, now we haven't had too much problem with that. I love it. It's a really great system. And I think it also...
Nice. And you get a way better Maillard reaction at that point, right? Like steam is going to be
I mean, that's
essentially
certainly
too soft of a heat.
the idea. The problem is I can't counterfactual it. Like I don't have the same system with steam to go back and forth. But I do know that
Right.
I can say that talking about with water and the things that we're doing with water and beers like Household Gods, that at different pHs we're trying to encourage Maillard reaction, and we get great Maillard reaction with our system at certain pHs. At other ones, at lower ones where we're like in a tighter range, we don't. But we still, honestly, so like a beer like Haladuda, it's 99.5% Pilsner malt, Bohemian Pilsner malt, and we add half a kilogram or like 0.75 kilogram of Cara Bohemian to adjust color. Like not because of character, but just because sometimes we get a little less color, sometimes we get a little bit more, and I don't like that uncertainty, so I add a little bit just to dial it in. Yeah, and that's another thing I learned from Kevin.
Yeah,
just
adding something. Yeah. Nice.
I remember this is years ago, probably around 2022, I think, when we first ran into each other. You showed me around the brewery. You've got a pretty unique system where the for decoction, you have the paddles that come in for your whirlpool, and then I think one of the things you were mentioning at that time too is that you uses
playing fast and loose.
Calculate,
it's still Well,
is that still true?
It's evolved a bit. It still knows on, and still have one carb stone that we opened with, and now we don't use it at all. Like I haven't used it since the first year that we were open.
Or without.
Everything is kind of done to taste, which sounds crazy, and I think probably occasionally bites us in the ass, but most of the time. So everything is either spunded or kreutzend and then spunded. And we've been doing a lot more in the last year or so with basically finishing the beer still and then harvesting yeast not under pressure, brewing another beer, a pale lager, and then using that to kreutzen the next one. And the kind of philosophy behind that was like, I realized that if you don't put your yeast under pressure, or at least our yeast under pressure, you get very different performance, especially generation over generation. Like by the third or fourth time you've done it, it's just like the only life I've known is freedom. I've never known pressure on me. I've never known CO2 in suspension around me in a serious way. I have so much fruit to give. Like I have so much to say. And so we've kind of done a lot of experimenting with that. But as a consequence of that, that means that every single time you kind of need to plan, well, what am I brewing? How am I going to kreutzen back that beer? And yeah, there's a kreutzen calculator we use, but I don't really use it anymore. Now I'm kind of like, all right, we use our half barrel brink, like a 58 and a third liter brink, and we use that. And that's usually, depending on what the Play-Doh of the kreutzen we're using is, that's usually enough to be like, okay, that'll get us a fullish carbonation. And then we basically adjust it by adjusting top pressure. So once it finally gets down to like lagering temperature, you kind of watch where's the top pressure going. And if it's like dropping low, top it up. It's dropping low, top it up. Unless you have a leak in the tank, you kind of realize, okay, like the total amount of CO2 that ended up in suspension was a little low. Maybe we misjudged our kreutzen a little bit. We didn't. Maybe there was too much head pressure in the tank, too much head space in the tank, and more of the CO2 ended up going. We didn't get enough in suspension. So it's basically every beer that we're doing, maybe like a week before packaging, because I'm always tasting our beers all the time, but like a week before packaging, we're tasting everything off the tank and being like, how does this feel carbonation wise? How's the foam? Like, what's it like? And I get that I would not be able to run a production brewery in such a haphazard fashion, but it works for us in our tap room, and it works for beer that we're sending out because like we're happy with the way that the carbonation is in all the beers we send out. It meets the standard of like, does this taste good? Is this what I want to present? It meets that standard, but it's a lot harder. If it was me and 10 other brewers trying to do it, if we were a larger production brewery, that wouldn't work. But for what we're doing, it does.
You would be on full on.
All I do is taste.
Management.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so to an earlier point.
Yeah.
At one sub box,
Free swish it.
unless I missed it in my 2 internships there, they don't zom anything either. The approach is, hey, we know how this works. We brew lager on Monday. On the following Monday, the beer is done. We verify that it's at terminal. It gets dropped to the cellar after getting chilled a couple degrees, like 5 centigrade. And then we have another beer that we brewed that day. The next morning, first thing, we kreutzen at 8 to 10%, whatever exactly the percentage is. We know what it's going to be at. We don't need to run it through the calculator because we do it 5 times a week. We drop that kreutzen in, and then we spund it to a certain level, and we know that 4 to 5 weeks later, it's good. And they're still tasting and doing sensory, but like no one's pulling out a zom and being like, is this carbonation right? They've set their spunding valves at either point, whatever it is, like this different beers have different spunding levels. Yeah. Well, it's funny. That's another thing that has really blown my mind about Franconia and those breweries is that they spund at much lower levels than you'd expect, and yet the beers have full like mouthfeel and full seeming carbonation, and they have great foam, but like the actual amount of CO2 in suspension is fairly low in Franconia comparatively. And again, it blows my mind. But they're doing something again and again and again and again and again, and they don't need to verify it with a tool per se. They trust themselves. I don't know if it's better, but it's one way to do it.
Yeah. You're kind of like you're loading the beer with CO2 early, so it's getting a lot of the way there, like that way, right? Whereas a lot of if you think of a lot of modern ales, they're fermenting quickly, not under pressure, and so they're starting at pretty low, slow amounts of dissolved CO2. So then, like most North American brewers are adding CO2 post fermentation, quite a bit of it. Others are probably not doing that, but I'd say majority are doing
totally.
that. Therefore, you need a lot of.
Well, I was about to say, I don't know if I'm just doing it to taste. If I could do that, if we're using a carb stone, but that was another thing that I learned at Cambridge Brewing Company. So the way that we didn't even call it spunding, but we basically did spund our beers there, like our ales. Like, you'd close the tank when it had a little bit left to go, and you'd chill it down. But you'd always get like a good amount of CO2 in there. But then we would be running it into the tank. We would be transferring it from fermenter to bright, and you'd be tasting it. And then you had a carb stone in line as it was moving, and you would adjust the carb along the way. And it was all done to taste. There was nothing else. And I was always very impressed by Will and Megan's ability to like know where it should be. And it was very clear to me. I was like, this is an acquired skill. I don't know if I've acquired it yet, but it's impressive.
Yeah, you can do it. I remember we had a C box that wasn't working, and one of our brewers, Maddie, was like, "I'll just taste it." I was like, "Okay." And he tried it, and he's like, "I'm guessing 235," and then finally got the C box working, and it was like, I don't know if it was 235, but it's pretty darn close. So I was like, okay, you got you've done this enough in your life that you can figure out what it is.
You hit upon
special technology.
An important point, which is okay, if I had to make something consistent and I was brewing 30 batches of it a week, and I got to make sure that this one is the exact same one according to these parameters, it would be very efficient to have a tool to do that. But the goal is to make sure that the beer tastes really good and that it's where it should be. So we can definitely taste a beer. For example, so we have a new lager beer coming out next week, another weird rustic Franconian inspired lager beer. And I kreutzened it, and it got all the pressure that it should, and it built up where it should be. And then we brought it down to lagering temperature, and everything was good by where it should be by the numbers. And then, I tasted it every day, and I brought home a growler, and I was just like, no, it's not. It's just not. It's too soft by the carbonation and mouthfeel and the fullness is too soft. And so we just put some top pressure on it, and we tried it the next day. We put some top, they did that. And then one day it was there. It was like, okay, there it is. And it's not, it would have been okay, but it's better when it's right there. And at the end of the day, like we're making beer. Like I guess I've become increasingly arrogant as I've gotten older. I don't mean like arrogant, like I have all the skills, but like arrogant in that like I'm making beer that I really want to. I'm trying to make beer that I really want to drink.
Yeah.
And so I have this idea increasingly when it comes to like the people coming to our place to, allude to an earlier idea that's like, hey, like we know what you want. Like you don't know that you want it yet, but we know what you want. So you have to trust us. Like we'll hold your hand, like get you to that place. And so like I know what I want to drink for beer. And like I'm never happy with my beer, but like sometimes I'm happier than others. And when I'm in that place where I'm like, oh, I'm happier than I used to be, like, yeah, this beer is expressing the way it should be. I've got the carb dialed in. Well, then I know. And I guess what I mean is I don't need an instrument to tell me that. If I needed to do it consistently on scale, it would be very helpful. But the goal is to make something excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
like at a beer judging competition, it's not like they have
It tastes good or not. Like, yeah.
before they tell you whether or
Totally,
not the combination is right.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
You're hitting on a good point of like sensory is really all that matters, right? Like the perception of beer, like your people are coming in to try the beer, they just want to have a good beer. They don't care what most people don't care what the pH of the beer is, or like what the specific parameters are. And then also to that point, I think like a couple things we've talked about is that there's so many we have so many conceptions about beer from all these like books that we all have on our shelves at home. Like I think we all have the same things, and we're all pulling as brewers from this information. And now there's forums online. There's so much information out there, and maybe just like coming at brewing as more of like, okay, like, but is it though? Like, does your direct fire like give you a lot of Maillard reactions or not? Or is it actually bad to like have your mash be 85 degrees? Maybe it's not. Like, or like you said about Kevin Davey, like hopping at 90 minutes and first wort. Like, there's a lot of ways to make beer, and sometimes you get caught up in like, oh yeah, but so and so said this way, and like maybe I would trust them if they were a really good brewer, or at least try it that way. But yeah, you gotta,
that is
expand your horizons.
I'm sorry, Aslan,
sometimes I think
you were saying something. Well, that has become one of my mantras since leaving Europe, which is essentially, if someone knows how to do something that you don't know how to do, if they can make a beer that you don't know how to make, believe them when they tell you how they make it, right? Like if they're like, oh, like we don't pay attention to mash pH, and yeah, I'm sure it's super high, and then we just add the Kreutzen, and like, okay, like try doing it, like try doing that thing, like don't. It's so easy to say, oh, what they told me, that can't be right. Oh, what they told me, that doesn't make any sense. Like I'll do the other things, but I'll use the hops they said to use, but I won't care about the pHs they said. It's so easy to do that. We have preconceived notions like these are the right pH ranges to be. Whatever idea you have about brewing, whatever dogmas you have, it's very easy to let those kind of push aside. Somebody who knows how to do something that you don't know how to do, their way of doing it. And if you really want to learn, not learn to replicate their beer, not learn to like make a carbon copy of it, but if you want to learn, like, is there a different way of looking at it that will produce really different results? That is the way to do it. And so that, to me, at least, that is what I've really tried to do since coming back from Europe. And if I had to encapsulate it into an idea or a tagline, it would be, there are many different mountaintops and there are many different ways to those mountaintops. Like, don't just assume that like, hey, there's one way to the mountaintop and that there's only one. Like the beer that is made at Munzenbach is radically different than my favorite beer from the Czech Republic, my favorite beer from Britain, and they're not trying to do the same thing. And they have really different approaches to get there. So if you think that there's like an approach, here's how to be a brewer, like, to me, that doesn't make sense. Like,
yeah, it's cool perspective for sure. You've touched on the like Franconia Keller beers and stuff. And there's a really great article about Keller beer that it was pretty recently that was released by Craft Beer and Brewing. But yeah, it's a really interesting approach. And I haven't per se have any like traditional Franconia beer. So maybe if you can talk more about that and how you would go about making them, and like how, like maybe a more like ingredients based approach Well, I mean, sometimes making that is just like a philosophical approach to making lager from the outset, but also maybe like a bit more talking about what literally differentiates like a Franconian like land beer versus a Einger.
No,
very
no,
clean lager.
it's a fascinating question
Or
because
even just the Otherlands
I
take
have
on
friends
it,
that live in Franconia and friends who are brewers outside of Franconia, and I've asked the question to them. And actually, I made a point the last time I interned at Munzenbach. I made a point of asking every brewer that I met, "Hey, what makes something a lager beer?" One word, lager beer, and they almost all of them kind of laughed and they were like, "Oh, that's not like a real thing." Like, I was like, "Okay, well, why do you call this beer a lager beer and not a Helles?" "Oh, well, because X, Y, and Z." "Okay, well, why isn't it a Dunkel?" Or why aren't you calling this why isn't this a Pils? Like, it's much hoppier than your Helles. You just said it's much hot. And like everyone had different answers. The two kind of coalesced answers I got
Right.
is that lager beer, Keller beer, Zwickel beer, land beer, these are all different terms that different people use, and that in a lot of cases with bigger breweries, again, this is the opinion of many different people, but not, the truth. It's just things that I heard, is that they're marketing terms, that people have emotional attachments to them. People have, cultural attachments to these ideas. But at the end of the day,
right?
yeah, it's all it's pretty
like our
prohibition
idea
style.
of like
It's
old world Pilsner.
Okay, so they're interchangeable, right? Zwickel, it's right off the Zwickel.
Yeah.
Keller beer, it's fresh from the Keller. But it also does mean something. Like, both doesn't mean anything and means something at the same time, which is a very strange contradiction. But when I like press people on it, like what I kind of got, other than, hey, it's all marketing, was, well, it's always a bit bigger than like a Helles or something like that. Oh, it's always a bit maltier. It's always a bit yeastier. The carbonation is always mellower. It's always a little darker. Like, no one could quite, and everyone had different answers for exactly what those details were, but it was always this thing that stood outside of established guidelines. We know what a Helles is. We know what a Pilsner is. We know what a Dunkel is. This other thing. It's really flavorful and great, and we love it. And it's so Franconian. But like, what is it? Well, it's a lager beer. It's a Keller beer. It's a Zwickel beer. Like, it's this term for like this thing that we make that we love. That's different. It doesn't fit into the categories. And so many of the beers that I've really fallen absolutely head over heels in love with in that area are those beers, are lager beers, right? Or Zwickel beers or Keller beers. Like, the Ungespundet at Marsbrau, right? Like, what's that? I don't know. Like, is it it's not a Dunkel, it's not a Märzen. Like, it's like kind of red, but it's not. It's kind of copper, but it's not. It's super soft in carbonation, but sometimes it's not. It's malty, but it's dry. Like, what the hell is it? Like, it's unfilled. It doesn't matter. Like, it's funny because like I think we have an idea that everything that I think we have a cultural idea that a stereotype, at least, that Germans are very category oriented and very rigid. And I mean, no culture actually fits into a stereotype, but like those types of beers certainly are not that. They exist in this kind of outer place. And then there's this other factor, like entirely like separate from Keller beer, Zwickel beer, lager beer, and things like that, is that you drink a bunch of beers that people call Helles in Bamberg and in the area surrounding Bamberg, right? And then you go and you drink them in Bavaria. Those are different.
Right.
And when you ask them what are the differences,
Yeah.
they'll tell you that they have radically different notions of what's different. Oh, well, ours
They're
is
also
more bitter.
different too, yes.
Oh, theirs are sweeter. Theirs are bigger. Like, they can't even agree on what the differences are. But in my experience, when I go to Franconia and I have Helles, and I love Helles, like, to me, they're big, they're broad, they're multi, they're expressive. Like, even so, my favorite Helles in probably the world is from a brewery called Brauerei Joseph Greif in Forchheim, and they make this Helles that's just like big and beefy, but also somehow delicate, and it's like hoppy but very malty, but very dry. Like it full of contradictions, and it's so damn good. And I can't imagine having a beer like that in. So by comparison, like I remember like having that beer recently, and then having Augustina Helles, which is a dream, and yet they're worlds apart. I'm not addressing your question at all, other than to say like there's so much ambiguity.
Well, yeah, you're demonstrating the diversity of like even like between different color beers or lager beers in Franconia. There's so like there's almost the unifying thing is they
answer your question. To actually try to answer your question, and I know that I'm kind of rambling here. There are some places that we went in Franconia that I really love. So like where I interned, Münzenbach, where the water is quite hard, very hard, and that's a big part of their flavor profile. And then there are other places that you go to and you ask, why is your beer the way it is? I love it. I love its character. Well, we have very soft water, and it's not unifying. I think what's unifying is that people make beers that don't feel constrained. If I come from an outside, be an anthropologist about it, like they don't feel constrained by category in the same way, right? Like your Helles has to be just like this. Yeah. If you're in Munich, it's not that way. It's like, here's my lager beer, here's my Urbrau, here's my Keller beer, and it's representative of the place that it's made at, and it's representative of the people who make it, and it's representative of the people who drink it. And that's enough. That's just beautiful about it. Like one of our absolute favorites, Knobloch in Schammelsdorf, I think. It's their lager beer is like off copper, wickedly bitter and dry and minerally. And then you taste like the Münzenbach one, which is just like fruity and like full and crazy expressive. Like they're totally different. So like if you were to like make a category at the GABF or something, like how would you couldn't possibly judge it. And I think that's the point. Yeah. Like they're not meant to be judged by people scoring them. They're meant to be judged by like, do people in the area love them and drink them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's such a common thing is like bring to market versus bring to styles. Like what is like lots of times I feel like even in our regions, it's like when it comes to beer awards, you're like, this is actually our top seller, but like it doesn't actually fit.
But people like it. Like your community loves it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why you laugh at awards sometimes. Like, well, it is what it is, but it still pays the bills, right? It doesn't have to win awards to pay the bills. With all that said about like Franconian beers, like how would you approach, like if you're me, like, I want to try to make something like that, how would you go approaching that to try to like replicate making that? Because I'm used to making more like pretty traditional, like straight edge, 3470 dominated lager beer, getting like just like pretty classic ingredients. Is there anything that's like ingredient side or like process wise that's like vastly different, or just that you're making a product that is maybe
that's a really good question,
rustic, or maybe just like doesn't fit
given
the style
what I was just pontificating about how varied they are. I guess it would be like, I guess my personal approach would be like, what is it I'm trying to get at? Like, what is it that has blown my mind? What is this thing that I don't know how to do that somebody else is doing? And like with a beer, so we have a beer that we opened with called Sumshoff Returning, and that is an attempt to try to like get what is so cool about the Mars Brau Ungespunde, the U, right? Like that beer is totally different than the Münzenbach lager beer, like the apples and oranges. But like when I think about like how are we going to make that, like I guess I think about what my target is, and in either case, I'm thinking, okay, well, like what techniques am I bringing to it? Well, I know that they're both doing decoction mashing, or I know that Münzenbach is, and my understanding historically is that Marsbrau is. I know that they're doing a decoction mash.
Yeah.
I taste both beers. I know that the yeast is totally expressive. And one of the things I've learned in my experience, both from seeing how people are doing it in those places, but also like experimenting a lot myself, is doing whatever I can to get more expression out of my yeast. And for us, a big part of that is getting rid of any pressure on it. So we talked about not having pressure during fermentation, not having not spunding and then harvesting yeast that's living under pressure. Like that's one part of it. But another thing that we do is, sounds kind of crazy, we don't use blow off hoses at all. So I don't like coming out of the butterfly valve, it's just open. And then we have 6-inch ports on top of our tanks that for dry hopping. I usually remove those, or at least I remove the gasket, and I put the clamp around it. And the idea being that like I don't want there to be any amount, not even like, just breathe out. Like we don't have open fermenters,
like
which is
zero
really cool.
pressure.
But like anything I can do to just encourage the yeast to be like, hey man, like there's no constraints, there's no rules here. Like just okay, temperature regulation's a rule. Yeah, like definitely be regulated by temperature. But other than that,
go crazy.
That's the only rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Other than that, you do you. Yeah.
Do you go like
that's really
cold
good too?
or is he or trying to
generally knock out pretty cold? We knock out at like 7, and then with our yeast we ferment at 10. And then I guess the other thing, like along those lines, is find a yeast that really works. And it's funny because our yeast is from an old German beer catalog. It's the yeast that they used to use in Mönchengladbach, but they don't use anymore. And it's just like it's a number in a catalog. And I remember like reading through that and a million other descriptions of yeast, and it said, most commonly used lager yeast in Germany. And I was like, I'm gonna pay to buy a slant of 3470, and then I brewed with it, and I was like, this is not 3470, or at least it's no 3470 that I've used from any American manufacturer, right? And so then I talk to other brewers in Germany. Sometimes people do not want to yeast, but sometimes they do, and when they do, they're usually like, yeah, we use 3470, but it doesn't. Their beers don't taste like they're using 3470, and maybe that's a question of like, hey, they're made. I mean. Anyone knows this with Chico or Conan or London 3, right? Different manufacturers, different isolations of yeast are radically different. And maybe that's the case with a yeast like 3470. Like maybe there's just what they're getting from certain German yeast banks is really different than what we're getting here. The one that we have, which is not called 3470, it's called whatever number it is in a yeast catalog. I would name 100 other yeasts before I'd say it's 3470. It's very fruity. It's very expressive. It produces more diacetyl than 3470. It doesn't produce the same kind of sulfur. It flocks differently. Like everything about it is different. Finding a yeast that you find expressive and then figuring out a way to treat it in a way to try to get more expression out of it. And I think for us, that's knocking out pretty cold, fermenting it like kind of a mid temperature. And now we don't really raise for a diacetyl rest. And then, okay, so like, to reference an earlier idea, allowing it to never be under pressure and only to breathe out, and then to kreutzen it with the next batch, had a demonstrable effect on terms of its fruity expression and also its attenuation. We realized we get better attenuation by like 0.2, 0.3 Plato by using yeast that has never been in generations where it's been under pressure. Gen 1 gets kreutzen by Gen 2, and back and back and back. By the time you're at like Gen 6, like you're just getting consistently better attenuation. You're getting better expression. You're getting more fruit. We're getting more kind of like doughiness. The fermentations are a little bit faster sometimes. Like you could just tell the yeast is having a better time. And to me, like trying to make beer that is really expressive in the way that I love Franconian beer, that's a big part of it. Another big part that I would swear by is decoction mashing. I think I don't know if I've ever had a beer from the Franconian region that I love that doesn't have like a big boldness of body and mouthfeel. And part of that's to me is decoction mashing. And then like I said, like some have like really hard water and they get like a bunch of Maillard reaction because of that, because they're mashing at much higher pHs and they're boiling at much higher pHs. Some aren't. I guess it kind of depends on what your target is and like what flavor profile you're really chasing. Trying to chase the flavor profile of Mönchengladbach and like what I found so unique and beautiful about it made me realize that like a lot of that beer, the color and the flavor is coming from Maillard, and so that has a lot to do with the pH. But then there's other beers that I absolutely adore from that area, like Heron Pills, right? I don't know what they're mashing at. I don't know what the water's like, but it doesn't taste that way. It's not like a Maillard bomb. It's not like,
Yeah.
here's all of the, it's different.
It seems, I was gonna say, it seems like it's like a true expression of like terroir, and like in that sense, like they're very subtle differences, and maybe not terroir is the right word. It's like hand taste or something. It's like the people who create it, like it's
Sure,
little,
that makes sense.
a little different though, even though it could be the same ingredients. It's somehow you handle
I think,
it.
the other thing is try to use
Yeah.
ingredients that are from the area if you can. Like, kind of no matter what you're doing. So like, I don't know, like if I'm trying to make Czech pills, or if I'm trying to make Franconian lager beer, I try to use if I'm making Franconian lager beer, I try to use Franconian malt. We have a malt that we import from the area, which is the other maltster in Bamberg. But like, Weirmann malt's awesome. Weirmann malt's great. I love Weirmann malt. Their general pills I don't find works for making the kind of Franconian inspired beers that I want to make. But we use their Bohemian pills for making all of our Czech and beers, and for the Haladuda, because it responds really well to decoction. It's got great flavor, picks up color, like it opens up. The malt that we bring in, that we use for making our Franconian beers and for our German beers, you have to decoct it. Like, you can step it. I feel like I know someone who has single infused it, but when I do iodine tests on it, when you're at beta, if you just like do a long beta rest or even a mid rest, it doesn't, like, it's sweet, but it never passes. You have to have multiple steps to get it there. And then when you boil a portion of it, it's like the flavor just opens up and it becomes like, oh, okay, well, it makes sense that this like weird, somewhat under modified malt is what a lot of those guys are using, because they're doing it in this traditional way. Like, and to an earlier point that you made about like when you visit a place and you're like, they're making their beer in a different way, they're thinking about it in a different way, and they're serving it in a different way, you can like tell it's kind of like all down the line. Like, their process for brewing it is different, the way that they're thinking about it is different, but then also like they're serving it from gravity kegs, and it works, like, because they have less carbonation, but that's offset by like what the perception of bitterness is, because the water is a little harder, and because they're spunning it in a certain way. Like, there's all of these kind of little steps that kind of go down through. It's very hard to kind of pick and choose and be like, oh, I'm interested in the way that Franconian beer is, so I'll do this thing and this thing and this thing, and now I'll be able to recreate it. The more I tried to like take little pieces, the more I realized, like, no, it's very holistic. Like, use their malt, use their yeast approaches, use their mash profiles, spund it the crazy way they want you to, or the way that they do, serve it that way. Like, the more holistic you go, the more kind of like all throughout, the more it seems to scratch that itch that we're trying to scratch.
Right.
Yeah.
All in all, like, what do you think excites you about the craft beer industry in general, like, moving forward? Like, we're at a bit of a point of, shrinking, or
maybe like, I think it was probably about a year ago that it like really hit me over the head that like, whoa, like, this is the first time in the 18 years I've been doing this that it's actually happening. We're actually shrinking. Like, the industry is getting smaller. More places are closing than opening. Maybe, we're in a tough spot. People have been prophesizing for a long time, but it never seemed to come to fruition. And one day I just kind of like realized, oh, here it is, right? And then I remember like talking with a friend of mine, another brewer, my friend Lou, who used to be the head brewer at Wander in Bellingham. A little before that happened, as we were kind of like getting inklings of that happening, about like, well, what do we do about it? Like, what's the response? Because I had read this article saying, it was an opinion piece by a beer writer saying that craft brewers had run out of ideas. That one of the things that was exciting about craft beer, why so many people were interested in craft beer, why so many craft breweries, why people drink so much craft beer, why craft beer had become mainstream instead of being a subculture, was that like it was always coming up with new ideas. Oh, we're doing IPAs now. Oh, we're doing New England hazy IPAs now. Oh, we're doing fruited sours. Oh, we're doing Goza. Like, it was just moving. It felt like it never stopped moving. And then one day it felt like either it was out of ideas or the momentum left or whatever it was, and it wasn't moving anymore. And it got me thinking about like, well, what do we want to do in response to that? And like, what do I want the craft beer industry to be? Like, not that I want to tell anyone else what to do, but the kind of idea that coalesced in my mind is like that what I want to do and what I hope other people do is take the thing that they're passionate about, take the thing that they're good at, take the thing that they have figured out, take the thing that is like you, and like do that more. Like there's one of the things that we've tried to do at Otherlands is, okay, well, we have a smaller menu and we're focused on rustic lagers and saisons and farmhouse ales, and we have an IPA in there, but like we have our focus, right? I feel like we're fairly curated, and there are places that are less curated. They do kind of all different styles, all different traditions, but like even among those places, they do certain things really well. Like there's some places in town that I think make unequivocally the best IPAs in the area. And there's other places there's a place in town that makes, I think, the best stout in the Northwest, if not the US. Like they're places that make they know how to do certain things really well, but they do a bunch of other things to kind of cater. And I kind of thought to myself, like, what if we all leaned into ourselves more? Like, what if instead of like Otherlands makes 6 or 7 Pilsners a year in terms of different Pilsners, and we make Helles, and I make like 1 or 2 other pale lagers and fest beer, and I make like 5 or 6 different IPAs a year, and I make a bunch of different saisons, and I make like 4 different dark lagers. What if we didn't do that? What if we became like, we make, like, you come to Otherlands and we have Helles, and we have Haladuda, and we have this amber lager, maybe it's some soft Franconian, maybe it's something else, and we have our house IPA, Wildflower, because if we don't, people are going to burn our place to the ground. Like we have to have an IPA. So like, but those are the things we do. And then seasonally, we have a special thing we're really excited about. It's much more of a European model, which obviously we're ripping off to a great degree. But like, what if we weren't the only ones to do that? Like, what if other people leaned more into the things that they're really, really damn good at, and everyone had their niche a little bit more? Because I feel like right now, like, okay, people have their niches, but they also have all these extra stuff. Like, what if everyone just trimmed themselves down? And if I want the best stout in the country, I'll go to Wander. If I want a Helles that I know I really like, maybe I'll go to Otherlands. Like if I want an incredible fruited sour, like I'll go to Aslan. Like I wonder if, I guess that's what excites me, is the possibility that we can break out of everyone needs to do everything. You need to cater to everyone. You need to do all the styles. Like, no, that's not the way it is in the rest of the world. And I'm excited about the prospect that maybe we'll do that.
Yeah, the craft beer industry. Do you have any like
it's
tidbits
changed
or
a lot
advice?
since I got into it.
You know, how to get into it?
The way that I got
to
in,
get where you're going.
I'm curious how you guys got in. Was home brewing, and then like bugging a lot of people, and then be like, can I hang out and like learn something? Can I like shadow you? And I guess you can shadow me. Like, and then like taking a low paying job when I was really young, and then like kind of like working my way up and establishing it. I don't know, it sounds like a Horatio Alger story or something, but like it's like kind of like starting at the bottom and working your way in, and asking a lot of questions. That really worked for me, but the industry's different. Like, I think a lot of people have realized that brewing doesn't pay, brewing's not ever going to pay, and that you can do a job where you still use your head, and it's very fulfilling, and you work with your hands, and you're really proud of it, and you can do a trade, which brewing is, right? But you can do something that just doesn't have to be something that you drink, but you do build meaningful things and help improve people's lives, and you can make 2 to 3 times as much. And I'm not saying that motivates me to do it, but like, I think I was talking with a brewer in Portland who I really respect, who's been in the industry for a long time, and he was basically voicing that he's really worried that there's a generation of people who are missing, that there's not young brewers coming in at the same rate that they used to be, people being passionate about trying to learn this trade. And I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I guess my advice would be, like, if you think this is really interesting, which I do,
No, but it's pretty. It's unique. It's nice seeing, friends, peers, people in the community. They're celebrating a time in their life or a break from their day or whatever.
Okay, if I was going to sum it up in a tinier sentence, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to do some work for free for a little while. It'll pay off. I'm not saying like, hey, unpaid internships for everyone forever. Like, but like, show someone that you're really interested in learning something, and they'll see it. If they're a decent person, if you're like, hey, like, what can I do to learn something from you? Like, I did an internship 2 years ago, like because I wanted to learn something from someone. Like, and I guess I'm in a different position than I was when I was younger, but like, if you have an opportunity to be like, hey, like, something I don't, can I wash kegs so I can ask you questions? Like, do it. You'll be better off for it. You'll learn something you didn't know before. And that's what it's about to me.
Yeah. It's all about learning, right? I think that's the cool thing about brewing, and what always interests me is that like it's unending. Like, I'm learning already about Franconian beers and Zoigl beers. Like, I didn't know before tonight, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. It's like inexhaustible, the amount of things that you can learn about beer, which is like, I don't know, that's cool to me. It's like learning history, but history is happening. Yes.
So, yeah, when you're not at the brewery, Ben, how do you like to spend your time?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I used to play a lot of music. I don't anymore. I read a lot.
Loaded question.
I mean, we live here in the Northwest, so obviously we go outside a lot. Doing a lot of hiking as much as we can. So yeah, just reading a lot, trying to inform myself as much as I can, trying to read poetry, trying to be a better writer. And then I've spent the last year and a half trying to learn German, which you want to really feel dumb. Like, try to learn the language at almost 40, and Jesus, it's but it's also been really fulfilling. So yeah, or just not doing anything at all, just trying to lie on the couch and listen to music. Yeah. I wish I had a better answer. Honestly, like, Carolina's always working on art and always trying to improve herself, and I'm lying on the couch listening to music or occasionally muttering in German.
Well deserved.
On Mondays.
Yeah, I guess for people that want to visit the brewery,
closed on Mondays.
You guys are in Bellingham, and that's the best place to get your beer. I'm assuming I don't think there's any closed on Mondays. Don't go on Mondays. Okay. But the rest of the time open, so head on down there on a weekend. Bellingham, too far away.
I'm really grateful that you had me on this, and I didn't realize it was the first cross-border podcast you're doing. I just want to let you guys know I'm really ashamed of the way our country's treating your country, and we have so many people who come to our place from Canada. We love them. You guys are a part of our community. You're part of our culture, you're our customers. And just, I'm really sorry as an American for what we're doing to you guys.
Wow, we
Hey.
appreciate it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a weird time for us, for sure.
I really hope that this ends soon. I really hope that my nation comes to its senses, and I really hope that we don't need to talk about tariffs or aluminum or any of this crap anytime soon. Because
Yeah. We're gonna be positive, and I think that by the time this episode comes out, it won't be too far.
I really hope so.
Then maybe this will all be a distant memory.
Well, it's great to talk to friends on the other side of the board.
Yeah. Let's hope for that. If you want to support the podcast, tell your friends about Why This Beer. We post new episodes on Instagram when they come out, and then the full versions get put on any podcast listening site that you use, and then we post them on YouTube after that. So yeah, stay tuned for that. If you want to support the podcast, also you can buy beer that we make. You can buy some Neighborhood Brewing beer and Yellow Dog Brewing beer wherever you can find it in BC, and Main Street Brewing beer wherever you can find it as well. Anything else you want to add, Aslan?
No, I think we covered a lot. And
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ben, for making the time.
Thank you guys for all your thoughtfulness.
One of those things. The more we get to chat about it, the more our community grows smaller
Yeah.
in a great way.